say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed?
Well, as has been stressed, people know the Russian elections are tomorrow, and it is an inflection point because what you have in Russia has been sort of a triumvirate, which it's Yakunin, who's the head of the Russian railroads, Medvedev, who's right now the president, and Putin, who's right now the prime minister. And what's about to happen is that Putin is going to become the president in the elections tomorrow, most likely. Now, the three of them collaborate very closely, and people might remember that Yakunin had given an interview a few years ago where he was asked how it was that the Russian railroads didn't go bankrupt. Why were they thriving economically? And he said, well, I got together with my old friend Lyndon LaRouche, and he said to me, and you could just imagine him describing, you know, like they're sitting down at a bar together or something. Lyndon LaRouche said to me, Vlad, the economy's going to crash, and went through. So the head of the Russian railroads said in a public interview, and he also repeated it in a lecture at the London School of Economics, that the reason the Russian rail company didn't go under is because he listened to the wise words of Lyndon LaRouche. So you can imagine what it means to the British Empire that you have a grouping in Russia, which is the leadership of the country, who are in a productive dialogue with Lyndon LaRouche, that Putin himself repeatedly cites Franklin Roosevelt, right? So their fear is that with the transatlantic system crashing, and one of these countries, whether it's Greece or Italy or whatever one blows, will bring down the whole Euro system. They cannot afford for this potential prosperity of a U.S.-Russia-China partnership. And therefore, provided that Putin manages to survive through the elections, and it is a very real threat. The London Economist has a front page article which someone emailed me today entitled Putin, the beginning of the end. I mean, it's like not very thinly veiled assassination threats against Putin. But remember what happened in the elections last year is that the whole thing just revved up more and more in the wake of the election. So what we could be entering is a period of great turbulence and intensity. And I just wanted, because this was so unbelievable, the Atlantic Monthly has an interview of Obama. And the way he talks is actually horrifying. He says, quote, I think that the Israeli government recognizes that as President of the United States, I don't bluff. I don't, as a matter of sound policy, go around advertising exactly what our intentions are. But I think both the Iranian and Israeli governments recognize that when the United States says it is unacceptable for Iran to have a nuclear weapon, we mean what we say. And of course, it's all ridiculous because Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon, and they right now don't have an intention of having a nuclear weapon. And then they use as the example, the only way historically that a country has ultimately decided not to get nuclear weapons without constant military intervention has been when they themselves take nuclear weapons off the table. That's what happened in Libya, and that's what happened in South Africa. Well, Libya really did very well for not having nuclear weapons, didn't they? And then later, this is really something. Talk about being an expert in sophistry. He says, look, if people want to say about me that I have a profound preference for peace over war, which I don't know who wants to say that about him, but in case someone did, that every time I order young men and women into combat theater and then I see the consequences on some of them if they're lucky enough to come back. Now this weighs on me. I make no apologies for that, because anyone who's sitting in my chair who isn't mindful of the costs of war shouldn't be here, because it's serious business. These aren't video games we're playing here. This is Obama. Now, having said that, I think it's fair to say over the last 3 years, I've shown myself pretty clearly willing, when I believe it's the core of the national interest of the United States, to direct military actions even when they entail enormous risks. Like, it is an enormous risk for some guy in Oklahoma to be, or Nevada, operating a drone in Pakistan. That American is under enormous risk. They are under enormous risk of psychological problems. But give me a break. Using drones to kill people is not putting American lives at risk. It's putting our nation in an insane situation. But it's just unbelievable. And obviously, the Bin Laden operation is the most dramatic, but Al-Qaeda was on its knees well before we took out Bin Laden because of our activities and my direction. I mean, the guy is like sick. He is disintegrating. He is a mental case. It's very clear. It's in print. This is the Atlantic Monthly. So you think about what Lynn is saying, the urgent necessity of Obama's removal under Section 4 of the 25th Amendment, and what that would do in terms of turning over the chessboard where some new leadership could emerge, a new Democratic candidate, some new Republican candidate. We could get candidates who are actually human, and we could do something. But right now it's catastrophic, and it is extremely dangerous. And this was Lynn's point to the U.S. military when we got a report, oh, don't worry, there's not going to be a war because the military is going to block it. He said, fine, the military against it, but the commander-in-chief is a lunatic. So unless the commander-in-chief is somehow, removed, put in a straitjacket, maybe he doesn't get removed, maybe you get an impeachment vote, which destroys Obama politically, so he can't do anything, whatever it is, but that he doesn't make the policy. And we're not there yet. So it's very dangerous. We were out at Columbus Circle here this morning, getting out a lot of literature, got a pretty decent response, actually. And we were doing this all over the world, so we'll know more later. Anyway, what I wanted to do was pick up on some of the material that's been in these weekly reports, because LaRouche has been stressing to the slate that we are not going to move the population through quote-unquote social engineering. Like, we're not going to organize our own Occupy Wall Street movement. We're not trying to bend to whatever is so-called popular opinion. But we have to actually recruit Americans to think scientifically. And I think one of the biggest problems is that Americans don't actually understand what economics is. And when someone says the word economics, how many people think of money? Isn't that what, like, everyone thinks of? You say economics and people think money? Well, that's actually not true at all. The other things you think of, because they teach you this in Economics 101, how about buy cheap, sell dear? Isn't that supposed to be economics, that you're supposed to, and not even produce? You buy something for cheap, you get that slave labor produced, whatever it is, take it to the market and sell it for a lot more than what you paid for it, and it's simple mathematics, isn't it? If you pay $1 for something and you sell it for $10, then you're making $9. Isn't that economics? Isn't that good? You have money. Well, that's great. I'm glad we have money. What do we do with that money if there's nothing being produced to spend it on? If there's no food, if we have no energy, if we don't have nuclear power, we only have solar panels. We'll get to that. Or the other thing, the law of of supply and demand, right? So suppose I say, well, I know if I make something very rare, like gold is supposedly rare, so you make it rare, and then it becomes worth more money, and then there's a greater demand, so people want it because it's rare and they're willing to spend more money. This is one of these so-called universal principles of economics. So how about we do that with food? That's a George Soros, another speculator. So why don't we say, well, everybody needs to eat. So how about we do this with corn, rice, and wheat? Why don't we make them really scarce? And then people will have to pay a lot of money. So isn't that good economics? That most of the world can't get any food, but a few people can, and then you can charge them a lot of money for it?
Like that
Right.
with gas now.
Exactly, that's exactly what they're doing with gas.
Gasoline.
So the speculators make money, but what actually happened to your so-called economy? The whole economy crashes. The standard of living crashes. But these are the laws of so-called economics. If you go to Columbia, and particularly Harvard, MIT, how about Oxford, that's what they teach you. The law of supply and demand. And so Americans have been very brainwashed. They've been very stupid, so they do stupid things like, remember Enron?
Yeah.
Now, what was the argument for that? You need competition because that's how you get supply and demand. Now, never mind that these competitions always seem to be rigged, like the exact same people were on the boards of every single energy company in California, but that didn't matter. It was supposed to be competition. So they take the state energy sector, the entire legislature, Democrats and Republicans, vote overwhelmingly to privatize electricity because that will, through this supply and demand mechanism, people will be forced to compete. And you're going to get better service for cheaper. And what happened?
Crash.
Yeah, totally. What happened was you did have the same people on all these companies. Enron was a total fraud. You remember they showed that they had this trading floor and they had calls coming in, but it was from a guy in an office across the hall. The whole thing was a total scam. And then they would jack up the price tenfold, 100-fold. They cut off electricity, right? Because if you can't get electricity, you'll pay more for it. So you had elderly people who died in elevators. That was great. That worked really well. And guess what? The majority of the population supported it. Just like free trade. Isn't free trade supposed to be good? That's economics. You don't have to pay a tariff. So then we can have all kinds of things, drugs, pornography, all kinds of stuff freely flowing across the borders. And everyone's supposed to be able to make more money because you have this so-called freedom to sell whatever you want to someone else and destroy their own industry. And what happened with free trade? The same thing. So somehow with each one of these so-called theories that everyone is taught about in their economics textbooks, the end result always seems to be the collapse of civilization.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so maybe we should re-examine what economics actually is. And, oh yeah, this is the other one. In case people are confused about what we mean by a credit system, I was talking to a good supporter who has been unable to contribute recently because he has a massive amount of credit card debt. And he said to me, he said, I think I made the same mistake that a lot of people did, which is you get all these credit cards and one has a $5,000 limit and one has a $10,000. He said, and I felt like I had $5,000 and $10,000, but actually I didn't have $5,000. I just had the right to borrow $5,000 from the bank that was going to charge me exorbitant interest rates and penalties for being late, right? So that is not what we mean by a credit system. Let me just be clear. Anyway, so there is an enormous amount of terrible, deadly, civilization-threatening confusion on this topic of economics. And what I wanted to look at is what the reality is. So the triple curve function. Now this is a really amazing thing because Lyndon LaRouche came up with this in 1996. Now when he came up with it in 96, it was a little different, which was that the financial aggregates were still ahead of the monetary aggregates. But what has happened, especially in this last period since the bailout, is that the monetary, we've had to issue tons and tons and tons of money, so that's out of control. But the things that it goes into have collapsed. Like the instruments that we didn't bail out were selling for 10 and 15 cents on the dollar, which is what makes it particularly ridiculous that we are giving Goldman Sachs and AIG 100 cents on the dollar for mortgage-backed securities and things like that, which would, for all those people who love the free market, we were not implementing the free market when it came to mortgage-backed securities. We were making sure that the government gave them every dime back. And the other thing about this, which I just want to make clear, this is not three separate things. You see three lines, right? You see the collapse of the physical production, you see this massive amount of money printing, and then you see these financial instruments. The idea of this being a function is that at a given, that these things are related to each other. That is, the collapse of this physical production is a function of printing the money. That is, printing the money to bail out the financial aggregates is causing the collapse of the physical production, and we'll see that more clearly later. Just like you get to a certain point, obviously the physical collapse is directly connected to the amount of money being printed. These are not isolated, they're not three separate things, it's one function. That's why he calls it the triple collapse function. So I want you to have that in mind, and then what I want to do, we're going to look at some of the material from the weekly report, but I just wanted you to look at a couple of videos that I found online. The first one we're going to look at is, this is from the Society of Civil Engineers. It's their report card for U.S. infrastructure. And it's pretty wild. It's just an overview. It's a quick overview. Basically, everything is a C or a D.
The American Society of Civil Engineers for America's infrastructure reveals a nation woefully underachieving in virtually every category.
We had 11 Ds and 4 Cs. If I was a parent and my child came home with those grades, I would not be happy.
The near-failing grades mean the critical systems supporting modern American society are becoming inadequate or outright dangerous.
It's a disgrace, frankly, the condition that our infrastructure is in.
Today, Americans sit in endless traffic jams on roads and runways. They sweat their blackouts and study in crumbling school buildings.
That's not the legacy that we should be passing on to the next generation.
Too many Americans live in fear of deadly floods, or wonder if their drinking water is drinkable. Aging and outdated infrastructure costs individuals and the nation time and money.
You could go in any system, whether it's aviation, water, wastewater, bridges, highways, energy, schools, you name it, we've got the same problem.
And if we don't do something soon, things will get worse and far more expensive to fix. But there is a way out.
If we want to raise the grade of America's infrastructure, it'll take a lot of money, a lot of time and commitment.
Other countries are making that commitment. Europe invests 5% of its GDP in infrastructure. China, 9%. But America spends just 2.4%. And this lack of financial commitment is hurting the nation's economy and competitiveness.
If our transportation systems are inefficient, it adds cost to our products and makes it difficult to deliver those products both domestically and overseas.
We need to have the energy grid available available to support the quality of life that we're used to, and to keep the nation in the forefront.
We need our railroads, we need our dams to protect us, we need our levees to protect us.
Without infrastructure systems, we don't have communities, we don't have cities, we don't have an economy.
Investment in new infrastructure is beginning to happen, with the urging and support of the President.
We will rebuild and
Sorry.
retrofit America to meet the demands of the 21st century. That means repairing and modernizing thousands of miles of America's roadways and providing new mass transit options for millions of Americans. If we act boldly, we will emerge in stronger and more prosperous.
Sorry. I'm cutting
They
it
wanna
there,
get
because
money.
the rest of it is a lie. You can't shut down the space program and say we're investing in infrastructure. But anyway, you get the idea just from seeing these images. In other words, when you don't maintain basic infrastructure, it is not a gradual decline. It's not like when people think about when you're having a recession and you tighten your belt, you don't know. What happens is the thing just, and the bottom drops out of it, right? And this is one of the discussions, for example, the Mississippi River. Apparently there's only something like 5 major bridges over which coal is transported for, coal-fired plants here and elsewhere. So if you have a major tornado, earthquake, something like that, you could knock out the whole entire thing. That's how vulnerable we are, and you see it every time here in New York, northern Jersey, when you get these storms and it floods. Every single time it takes longer and longer and longer for the power to be turned back on. This last one, they had to bring in utility workers from Pennsylvania because New Jersey did not have the manpower simply to repair the downed wires. So where do you get to the point where they say, sorry, we're not going to turn it back on? We can't. Well, see us in 6 months. We might be able to get your power back on in 6 months. Right? And that's where you see a totally precipitous collapse. Now, I just wanted to show you this other thing while we're looking at these movies, because I had some questions about steel production, what actually goes into it. And of course, it is the basis for everything you want to build, buildings, roads, railroads, everything. And of course, I think all of our steel companies went bankrupt. We have some now doing something or other, but we largely import from China, which is also insane. If you think of the weight of steel and what the cost must be to, it really, really is wacky. But anyway, so just watch this and think about what the environmentalist movement is doing. If you remember, I filmed a statement in Hackensack. They put solar panels all over the roof of the parking garage. And I went there on a day which was like 95 degrees and sunny. And so all the solar panels were getting like the maximum amount of sunshine. And I think that amount of solar panels provided enough electricity to power the light bulbs in one building.
One floor.
One floor? Okay, in one floor. What was like 100 light bulbs or so? It was ridiculous. So you cover the entire parking garage. You have 95-degree weather with full sun, and you have enough energy to power 160-watt bulbs. That's what we're looking at. Now you look at this process to make steel and try and imagine whether we could produce anything on a solar or wind-powered economy.
Few fireworks displays are more spectacular than the drama that is steelmaking. The story of hot metal and cold steel is fascinating from start to finish, especially when seen through the experienced eyes of United States Steel. For our company, the story begins with a blast. As rock explodes and the raw materials of steel are tossed from the earth. The rock is taconite, and the prize inside is crude iron ore. We get at it by grinding the rock to powder and separating the ore with powerful magnets. Then we form and heat the ore into marble-sized pellets that will later be converted to iron. From bituminous coal, we create coke to fuel the iron-making furnaces. We crush the coal, seal it in airtight ovens, bake for 12 to 16 hours, and remove it from the oven as solid carbon fuel. The fuel and pellets come together in the blast furnace, where we add just enough limestone to remove impurities. From below, a continuous blast of superheated air combusts the coke, intensifying the heat and changing raw materials into molten iron. Sometimes more than 9,000 tons of it a day in our largest blast furnace, where it reaches a temperature of 2,700 degrees Fahrenheit. At regular intervals, we tap this blistering brew into giant submarine ladles that ride on rails to the basic oxygen shaft, where iron will be turned into steel. In this fast-paced sequence, up to 250 tons of steel can be made to order in less than 45 minutes. We begin the steel-making process by dumping recycled steel scrap into the basic oxygen furnace and adding hot iron. Sparks steal the show when high-purity oxygen is blown into the mix at supersonic speeds and molten iron becomes molten steel. Now we're ready to create the custom blends that make steel the most widely used metal on the planet. In fact, we produce over 1,500 different chemistries to meet customer demand for cutting-edge, value-added steel. Look for another show of sparks as we tap molten steel from the Bop vessel into a ladle. Then, for most of our steels, it's on to the vacuum degasser, where they are made highly formable. The focus then shifts to forming and finishing, which determine even more of the steel's characteristics. The first step in this sequence is to position the ladle above a massive tundish or funnel that feeds a continuous caster containing molds that shape the steel. The molten steel, now at 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, is channeled from ladle to tundish to caster, where it cools to a red-hot solid. The shape of the mold determines the shape of the semi-finished products that come out of the caster. And since most U.S. steel plants make sheet products, most of our casters output slabs, typically 8 to 9 inches thick and 3 to 5 feet wide. As they exit the caster, slabs are cut into sections up to 40 feet long and stacked to await further processing. Then it's on to the hot strip mill. This is where we begin transforming steel slab into steel sheet. Slabs are reheated to 2,400 degrees Fahrenheit and descaled before running through a series of roughing stands that make them thinner and longer. Then they cycle through finishing stands where they are rolled even thinner. Finally, they are cooled and rolled into coils that may be thousands of feet long but only fractions of an inch thick. A far cry from the chunky rectangle that came out of the caster. And the entire process is untouched by human hands, controlled instead by operators using state-of-the-art automated equipment in pulpits that overlook the action. Next, we move to the pickle line, where coils move through an acid bath that cleans the surface. Some of the emerging coils are shipped directly to customers as hot band. Others are destined for applications that require special finishing, beginning with cold rolling to make them even thinner. At that point, coils may be shipped or go on to one or more additional finishing processes. Coating to make the steel resistant to corrosion. Tinning to further reduce the gauge and add the tin coat we commonly see on canned goods. Annealing to make steel that is easier to bend and form. And tempering that uses special rollers to add hardness and create surface textures and other special finishes. In fact, many of our products leave the finishing facilities as the industry's newest superstars. Lighter, stronger, highly engineered, formable steels that were unheard of just a few short years ago. No wonder the story of steelmaking stays so fresh, with innovations that guarantee something new to see in each showing, with product placements in our homes and high-rises, on our highways, and in every other part of our daily lives. And with a cast of thousands who continue to improve and perfect every step of the steel-making process, from shaped pellet to shipped coil and beyond.
What?
Oh, 2006.
Yeah.
So the price of gas, and
yeah.
the price now.
I know. Yeah. Isn't that something? But 250 tons in 45 minutes.
Yeah, yeah.
It's amazing. Amazing. All right. So now, what I wanted to do is to look at. Go to the first thing close in. Yeah. People remember this. We've seen this. It's really critical when you're looking at human economy, and it's not just energy flux density, it's also a certain diversity. But the idea is that if you take here, this was where the dinosaurs went extinct, and you could say that what happened maybe at this little point back here is where you had the first mammals come into existence. But the mammals were not the dominant species of the day. The dinosaurs and reptiles were. But at a certain point, in this case, probably there were galactic forces, and everyone doesn't know everything that happened, whether it's asteroids, volcanoes, earthquakes, a lot of things happened, which the dinosaurs could not survive. So it actually, this cone that they were on would not have actually remained a cone, it would have collapsed. And it did collapse, they all went extinct. Most things went extinct, like 80%. It says here 80% of the species on the planet all went extinct. But this little growth of mammals, because of the superiority of their biological systems, were able to expand and survive. And the question on human economy is the same thing. If you think about doing something like burning wood, suppose this was a wood burning system. So first you're burning wood in campfires, then you figure out how to use wood stoves. So you get more and more energy from your wood. Maybe you develop, I don't know what you use to power. I guess you could have some kind of motor, some kind of chainsaw or whatever, so you can get more wood. So you have an expansion, but at a certain point you're going to run out of wood. So what happens? Either you have made the potential to go to a new level of technology or the whole thing implodes. So in that case, you could say, well, maybe at this point was where someone discovered coal under the ground, and they discovered it would burn longer, and they discovered there was more of it. So you have a new system that's beginning to become dominant, and therefore when the previous system gets to the point where everything's going to collapse, you have shifted into your new, more efficient system, coal, petroleum, and see, we really screwed up, and you're going to get a sense of it because Eisenhower, this whole idea of atoms for peace, nuclear energy was in the 50s. And Kennedy was pushing this with the space program. We had a chance to shift, and we didn't. So we've put ourselves on a trajectory for collapse, and the problem with these things, it's like food production. You can't just say, now we're going to have a new, it takes years to bring a nuclear power plant online. Just like with food production, you can't say, oh, gee, we have food shortages, plant a seed, we'll come by tomorrow and we'll have a tomato plant. right? You actually have to be planning in advance. So what happened with us is you had the little beginning point of a nuclear-powered economy, then you had the assassination of Kennedy, a whole environmentalist movement, the anti-science, so we stopped it. And now we're heading to a collapse of the previous system with nothing to stand on except for what China and Russia are doing, but their history, the culture of those nations is not sufficient without the United States to pull the world out of a collapse. So we're gonna look at is, what's that? Yeah, this is kind of interesting. What you have here, I don't know if people can read, this green line is wood. This is millions of metric tons worldwide, and it's not, this chart is not per capita. So what you see, primary metals, it's zigzagging, but it's basically on a downward trajectory, okay, worldwide. Wood, kind of jagging, maybe it's going a little bit up. Orange is primary paper, that would be connected with wood. This is recycled metals, that's been going up a little bit. Plastics, kind of a slow curve, and recycled paper. But in general, what you're looking at with all of these things is kind of a leveling off. A system that's headed for collapse with nothing new coming online worldwide. What's next? Now this is per capita. You can see it's actually collapsed. This is the amount produced per person on the planet. Look at primary metals. That is really collapsing. Wood is sort of staying the same. And it's worth thinking, if you think about something like electricity consumption, like before, I don't know, the 1940s or so, or before the 1930s, there were a lot of parts of the United States where people didn't have electricity. And then people began to get electricity. You had the Rural Electrification Administration under FDR. So more and more people got electricity, and then what happened was you had really like a hyperbolic jump in what people consumed. Because suddenly you could do things that you couldn't do before. You could refrigerate food. You could have an electric washer and dryer. You could have a hair dryer. You could have, right, a tele. So what happened was the amount of consumption of electricity per capita actually increased in the same shape as those cones that we saw. That's natural. It's actually natural for not just the consumption to increase because of population growth, but for the amount consumed per person to increase. And that's the thing that really freaks out. If you think about Malthus, right? Population grows geometrically, resources only increase arithmetically. That idea totally freaks out any environmentalist. That it's a natural thing for each generation to consume more than the previous generation. It's natural and it's good. And not only that, we need more people consuming more from one generation to the next. That's the natural order of things. Because if you think about what Alexander Hamilton said in his argument for manufacturers, what he said is that as you develop technology, as you develop science, that you will need more people who are specialized in different areas, because you're going to have to know a great deal to be able to deal with, like you think of parts of the nuclear energy industry. One person is not going to be able to know everything from the concrete that goes into the plant, which is probably quite specialized, to the containment vessel, to the reaction, to the computers. You're going to have people who know each part in depth, right? And so you're going to require more people. And if they have to think, you want people who have breakfast in the morning.
Yes.
You want people who have a decent nutritional standard, who are educated. All right, you don't want people who are stuck out, picking potatoes somewhere for half the day because that's how their family is getting by, and then at night they're going to learn nuclear physics, right? It does. So you actually have to have a population with a higher standard of living that consumes more. So when you see this is death. This is a dark age because you're collapsing, and it reminds me, what's the next one? Go back. Yeah, anyway, this reminds me, does everyone remember those Roadrunner cartoons where the coyote runs off the cliff and then he's hanging there for a minute and then he looks down, he goes, well, in a sense, that's where we are. We're like the coyote, man. We have run off the cliff and we have nothing underneath. We haven't done, we did not get to the nuclear powered economy. We are hanging, we're like above such an unbelievable collapse, and that's what LaRouche is trying to get through. And people are like the coyote, they're saying, I don't know, it seems like everything's going great. I'm just here, you know, the drop hasn't happened yet. And in an instant, it's gone. And you have to take emergency action, like what he was proposing on food, because you might say, well, what do you do about food? You need 18 months preparation. Well, thankfully, our planet has different seasons, so when it's winter in our hemisphere, it's summer in the other hemisphere. So you could actually say, you know what, we need Argentina, Australia, we need some of these places to go into emergency massive production. During the time of year when you can't grow food in the United States, we're going to need some other part of the planet to pick up on this so we can address it. Was that done? No. But there are measures that you could take that we could somehow address this, but we are really going off the cliff. Okay, next. Again, this is the thing. This straight line, that is the killer. That is death. Because what you need is this kind of curve of hyperbolic growth. And Leona used the graphic in the Russia video where she showed if you take the hyperbolic curve that you're supposed to get and you flatten it, then in relationship to it, what is a straight line there is actually a collapse. And that's how it feels in the economy, that you have less per capita. This is not per capita. This is globally. So basically, since 1960, since the assassination of Kennedy, we have been heading towards this collapse. Okay. Yeah, I don't know what to do about that. Just skip it. Now look at this. So the United States, since the 70s, has been insane. This is not per capita. So what it means is in the US, per capita, you actually have a collapse of metals, of production. The rest of the, and the world includes the United States. You can imagine other parts of the world are actually going in the right direction. Is it China one is? Yeah, this is China. Isn't that interesting? So in China, and the guy on the American Engineer said China spends 9% of its GDP on investment in infrastructure. So here, I'll just tell you, the blue line is copper, the purple line is steel, aluminum is black, iron ore, I can't read that, but those two are both going up. Oil is not going up that much. Okay, zinc, everything else is going up hyperbolically, oil is not. And that's the way it should be, because if you think about those nested cones, if you're going to a new form of energy, if you're moving to a nuclear powered society, then the amount of petroleum used is going to collapse. And that's fine, there's nothing wrong with that because you've made a leap to the new system. No. Anyway, so think about this and then go back to what the discussion was at the beginning on the whole topic of what's economics. What is this thing I just showed with China, or with metal consumption and production, what does that have to do with money? Don't we have a lot more money? How come we have so much more money now and we produce so much less? And there's all kinds of tricks. What Cody went through is that what you actually, there's different kinds of things. Like in the US, you have something called the productivity index, which is the amount produced per the number of people employed. So if you take an auto plant and you cut the workforce in half, you still have a bunch of automobiles that are on the assembly line. So for a couple of months, your production is actually the same, but your workforce has been cut in half. But on the productivity index, you would say that you are twice as productive as you were before, because the workforce was cut in half. Right? That's how this thing works. Or you think about, and that's how this monetarism looks. Like you take what LaRouche said about how was he able, in the 50s, he said he knew there was going to be a recession because he was a management consultant for automobile companies. And what happened was they were producing all these different kinds of automobiles. You'd have like a new style every year, and people would pay over time, but they would never get to the payment at the end. They would trade it in and get another car. So what happened was you had all this money flowing in, but it was deceptive because the original car actually never was paid for, right? So what happened was your production, at a certain point, the thing crashed, which he said it would. So of necessity, by creating an idea that just generating money is what you're trying to do, it actually only works as the triple. You actually have to suck out, you have to cut your physical production, in effect, and convert it into money, so that the more money that you're printing, the less you actually produce. And that's how this crazy, that's why all these so-called bailouts not only are not helping the economy, they're actually destroying the economy because they're fueling the process of collapse. So anyway, I just want to know if people have thoughts or questions, because I think that, first of all, the steel thing is totally amazing. You realize what kind of infrastructure you have to have a steel industry. How do you get heat temperatures of 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, machines that can move? I don't know how much one of those 8-inch by 40-foot slabs of steel weighs, but but Bruce.
Where's located? Where are they?
United Steel.
I just came back from the casino in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania.
Oh yeah.
And I seen how awesome that was back in the heydays. I mean,
Yeah.
The bricks are still stainless steel, stainless throughout the plant. And it's a huge facility. And I'm wondering, to activate a plant like that, or like the steel companies that
Yeah.
are all over, how would they get into producing steel for the future for the train?
Right. Well, see, that's exactly the way to think about it, because this is where you actually, it's the future that defines what you're going to do. This is why LaRouche said we shouldn't use the word infrastructure anymore. We should talk about platform. Because if you say, look, I mean, these traffic jams, and everyone knows it, but you don't typically think of it as a national phenomenon. How many man hours are wasted of people sitting in traffic around the country? Right? So if you say, look, we should have 12,000 miles of high-speed rail, and we want it done in 5 years, because it's going to change the nation. Then what happens is the steel gets reinvigorated, all of these plant equipment, because you have a national mission to do something really big. Whereas if you just said, well, we're going to build this little bridge, that wouldn't drive the industry to get back. Yes?
I live in New Jersey, and I was a daily commuter into New York. And Governor Christie from New Jersey, he killed that third tunnel coming through.
Right.
That was, because like not only talking about traffic jams with cars on the highway.
Right.
Because I live in East Orange, and I was on one of the newer rail lines coming into New York, the Morris Essex line.
Uh-huh.
And you also had another line that started here, mine did, Booton line. So you've got the Northeast Corridor, another corridor that came in from South Jersey, plus the 2 new lines. And we had trains sitting at the mouth of the tunnel, because there was only 2 tunnels. One
Right,
going in
right.
and one coming out.
No,
And you
exactly.
needed that third one. And
Right.
I don't know how Christie got away with that.
No, it was and the outrageous thing was we had already been given, I forget now all the figures.
The money, yeah.
Yeah, we had gotten a huge amount of money from the federal government. We had hired 6,000 people.
Yeah, it's partially,
And he canceled it, and then
Canceled the
we
whole
have
thing.
to repay the federal government and lay off all the people who were gonna build it. What, Eugene?
Well, can you define economics as a physical process of production of goods and services? Would money play any part of that? Could you say it's a physical production of goods and services and monetary also? Or would money have no part at all in the definition of economics?
Well, it's not money per se, it's credit, but I would say it's even different because the domain of economics is actually not physical. It's actually in the human mind. That is the key question, is that little spark of creative insight where someone makes a discovery which allows you to leap from one domain to the next. So the real question of economic science is the question of human creativity. And you can measure it like Kepler and other people. You try and look at the footprints of this creative process. So you can measure it in terms of physical production per capita, or things like life expectancy or infant mortality. There are physical manifestations of the success of it, but the actual science of economics is in the realm of the human mind.
it's still kind of vague.
Yeah, well, it is big. I mean, because you can't grab it, you can't hold on to it and weigh it. But that's what LaRouche's area of expertise is, and why he was considered such a threat, is that, and his view ever since forever, is that every single human being, barring ones that are born with some kind of, actual physical defect, every single human being actually has the potential to be a genius. That's the nature of being human, and that it's not arbitrary, and it's not a genetic thing, and it doesn't have to do with, what kind of milk you drank or whatever, right? So the question is, how do you have a culture which cultivates that and which allows the maximum number of people to find themselves in a situation where they're making these discoveries?
I'm just wondering, like now, you get the sense, no matter where you go, there is, I guess I can put it this way, a characteristic in the air now. Everybody thinks that there's something wrong, but they don't know what it is, but they know there's something wrong going on.
Yes. Yeah, and also what you say, I'm glad you brought that up. It's interesting because people don't know how to express it.
Yeah.
Like you meet a person and they don't even know how to ask what they want to know. Like they say, how are you going to get Obama out? Which sounds like a question. Well, first you do this, then you do this. And of course, everyone knows that's not how it works. Everyone knows we can't predict, oh yes, you do A and then B will happen, and then because there's way too many factors involved, you have to create a certain dynamic. So how do you answer a question like this, which is why LaRouche keeps talking about this question of metaphor. And it's very interesting because we find a lot as organizers, it's very easy to get trapped. Someone says, well, what do you mean World War III? How is that going to start? And the instant you say, well, Israel bombs Iran, and you try and give a scenario, you're dead. Because it doesn't work like that, right? There's an intent, which is bigger. And that's the ticklish thing, because you can't like hold it, you can't identify it in words. But you can create an idea by giving someone a sense of the dynamic of the whole process. You know, like how do you say, take one of these things, like what would actually happen if New York City and northern New Jersey didn't have electricity for a month? And just start thinking about, I mean, it's worth it.
Well, that happened in Connecticut.
Right, but imagine Manhattan and northern Jersey. All right, no elevators. What would happen because of that? No refrigeration. What would happen because of that?
Be a disaster.
No lights, and weird things would happen that you wouldn't even think about now. Right, that we can't even describe. If we were to sit down and try and itemize all the things that would happen as a result of not having electricity, there would be things that would be so wild that we couldn't imagine them right now, but as that collapse happened, they would become evident. You know, like what happens when all the food in the grocery stores all goes bad? How much farmland is there in Manhattan? I mean,
Even New Jersey.
exactly, northern Jersey.
Farmland in New Jersey now is a mall.
Yeah, right. Right. No. And then what does the population do? Right? Do people become cannibals? I mean, I'm just saying, where does this thing?
China to send us stuff.
Yeah, right.
What is happening?
Excepting it takes 3 weeks to get here, so.
There's no way. I got my house in my bank account.
Yeah, right. Your bank account, but no food. I mean, so these are. Yeah, you can't get your account.
So now you can see, just explaining that scenario, how money is worthless.
Right. Yeah. The money is.
The money's not, you can't buy anything because it's like it's all dead. You need to have a pocket full of dollar bills. You can't buy anything.
Right.
Because there's nothing to buy.
Yeah.
It's gone.
Yeah. Yeah.
So now I understand this thing about the physical economy. There you go. Okay,
Good.
so you took away my Oreo cookies.
Right. But isn't that funny? Because how then do you because you can't just say to a person, the money's worthless. They don't know what you mean.
Right.
Right? You have to actually somehow get someone to think through a whole, or you show these charts that we have no metal. We're not producing any metal. You say, oh, well, that's all right. I mean, my house is built, my road is here, right? But then you realize there's something much greater to that. Like the Tappan Zee Bridge, that's one of the worst in the country. It's like D or E or F or something. It's going to fall down at any minute. So they're talking about a new bridge or a tunnel. Well, how do you do that if you have no
steel?
Yeah. And do you just keep driving across it to the point where it just goes? They could use it as a footbridge, but I was laughing because what if they have a marathon and everyone runs in step? Then you get the vibration and the whole thing. Oh God. Hold on, Daniel, you're going to say something.
I was just going to say this discussion reminds me of the Bruegel painting, Blind Leading the Blind, which is a painting that's of these 4 or 5 blind beggars who are walking past the church in the distance, and the person in the back is holding on to the person in front of them and just thinks that, oh, we're walking along, we're okay. And then the next person is starting to feel that there's something wrong at the front. And then the next person is starting to slip down. And then the next person, the person who's at the very front, is actually falling face down into a ditch. And this is sort of a way that it's working. And it also reminds me of a novel by a Brazilian author, Jose Saramago, who won the Nobel Prize, the Prize for Literature recently, called Blindness. And he imagines a scenario where everyone in a capital city all of a sudden wakes up and they're blind. And what would happen? And what would that be like? And this is what we're facing when we have leaders who are blind, who are insane. Is this sort of completely unpredictable collapse?
Well, what's wild is think about and I must say I'm getting more and more freaked out every time I watch CNN or Fox, which I never do of the so-called debates.
Oh, God.
And they're like in front of this plastic machine with blue lights on them, and you feel like you went to Disney World. And then they have to answer questions about whatever, gay marriage, abortion, and we're gonna be dead. I mean, a nuclear war, does the nuclear bomb care what your sexual orientation is? Or, I mean, it is astounding, and it is that sense. I love that image of the coyote, because we really are there. We're just hanging out there. There is no damn reason why we even still exist. People haven't begun to address it, and they're standing there like the coyote on nothing, expounding on a so-called issue, you know, gun control. Like having a gun is going to save you from an asteroid smashing into the planet. I mean, it's astounding. And what you're saying, Fran, I think the population does know that something's not right about this, but they haven't been given a culture where they can actually express it.
Well, I heard it once when I was buying some tile for my bathroom, and I'm in the tile place. My neighbor's young guy come through. He said, "It's time for revolution, y'all. We got to fight." And I'm scared. It really blew my mind, you know, to hear something like that.
Yeah, well, people have a sense, but then they have these silly ideas. Well, so-and-so got more money. Well, so what if they have money? We're going to be out of food, right? So-and-so got money and we didn't get money. I mean, and people are better than that. They don't mean that, but those are the terms that are given to the population to express these things.
Well, if I could just say one other thing. I think it was early this week, I was watching, I think it was Charlie Rose, and he had Neil Gabler on, who's the film critic, and Neil Gabler was saying, the problem with the American thought now is they're doing politics as a movie. You have to have a hero come through, and they've all got this hero type of mentality, and you have to create some type of an enemy, and the hero has to win.
Except we don't have a hero.
They're doing a lousy job.
What, Rod?
Just to state the obvious, let's say you have a nuclear hit over in Port Elizabeth and Port Newark. You knock out your refineries, you knock out your logistics. I don't care how much money you've got. You now cannot, within a short period of time, generate electricity. Most of the electricity in the New York area is generated by small oil-powered generators, gasoline power, well, not gasoline, diesel in most cases. Generators. A lot are, some are oil burners using water, steam. There's different systems by which they're generating it, but basically, you got to have some oil come in on a ship. And it's got to be refined, it's got to be put out there. If you don't have it, now you lose your source of electricity. How much is dependent? Transportation, other things, communication, everything you do in your life is dependent upon electricity. Your food supply, because of the way that they operate the supermarkets logistically today, your food supply in your supermarkets is only for about a week, okay? In other words, they don't have stock or inventory for too much time. The idea is they put it in there, get it in there and out, okay, right away. The old-fashioned supermarket where they take in and you got canned goods for another 2 months or something, that don't exist anymore, okay? So the logistical operation breaks down quite easy. And it doesn't matter what money you have in your pocket, you can't buy something that ain't there.
Right, and also if there's no electricity, your credit card won't work.
What?
Because they have to
Can't swipe your credit
you can't, there won't be any electronic transactions.
Oh my God.
So you
Yeah,
can
well, yeah, right. The electricity goes, that's it.
I just want to show something.
Okay,
Right.
hold on.
But I mean, even if you have physical
Wait.
cash.
Hold on, let me just show you
Go
something.
ahead.
Take that up.
Okay.
What Bruce is talking about here, it's absolutely satanic. If you go to Bethlehem, Pennsylvania,
Yes.
this is the steel complex in the middle of the day, what would be frankly the first shift, right?
It's down.
There's nothing going on, right? No smoke, no anything. You can see the huge effect. Now look at this. This is the satanic part. So you're driving along saying, wow, that's really neat, you know, and this is what you see.
Oh my God.
Right there at the steel complex on this, they make it look like it's a theme. We're going to have the former steel plant gambling theme here. I mean, I didn't go inside. I don't know what the hell they got in there. I don't want to know. But anyway. And so it's totally sick, and then they have this little sign.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah, see that?
Industrial sector.
Casino Resort, and then they have that little thing there. So literally they took this old steel plant, and of course the way this works is that the people that live there are sold it. Oh, we're going to make a lot of money. We're not making money on that steel, just like the Enron story. So I mean, this thing, when I saw this, I was like, my God, this is like the metaphor of everything that's psychotic in the country.
I saw something similar to that when I went to a friend's family reunion in Ohio.
Oh, yeah.
And just for a day, she says, let's take a ride. And we must have gone down one roadway for good, I would say, 5 to 10 miles. That used to be, I guess, U.S. Steel. And she said, this is why they call it the Rust Belt.
Yeah.
And that really scared me.
Yeah. No,
And now you really see the results of it. And it's kind of ridiculous, you know, because riding on the train, when I look up, you see the logo on the New Jersey Transit trains where they're made. It's Bombardier, the steel company out of Canada.
Really?
what, Alvin?
Yeah, this breakdown of steel, or at least kind of an introductory to what we can, not only what its capabilities are, but what we can fire up again, right, in this area is useful. As was really last week, the exercise we did with Alexandria,
Right.
which I must admit to being totally opposed to internally.
Uh-huh.
Oh man, you know, and how, but it really helped me to do something I hadn't been doing, and that was really thinking about what can be and what should be. And this helps to do that when I'm trying to talk with people. Some of my contacts have kind of disappeared because the World War III thing has completely floored them. And you know, I'm really trying not to scare. So you're really trying to give a balance, a straightforward account, but then of course countering it, for example, with the work of Dempsey and company, to say that while this is not enough, this is huge, it's significant, and it shows something. So this is just another layer for me to then help provide a person again with what can really be done, because there is a real freak out going on I don't have a lot of contact, but between those few, this is what I'm seeing. For some, it's that, gee, you know, I really like the intellectual and academic things you do, but now they're saying this really is war, and that's something that, you know, I'd much rather discuss these other things. But for a lot of people, at least that's my sense, it's just that because, again, we would talk regularly, they're not calling back over the past couple of weeks, you know. Then they do call back, but so then I'm thinking to myself, what is it that I have to provide them with? And so I find this, as well as Alexandria's classes, really helpful. They say, okay, you know, let me work on this, and then I can share, because otherwise, they're really shook up that we're this close.
And these things of the future is really key. Like you think of when we were discussing what would it take to get to Mars. Well, I don't know, does the Sands gambling casino contribute? do the Mars mission, you know, it really gives you a way of seeing how destructive it is. Marty, you were going to say something?
There you go, Marty.
What it would take to start these things up again. They've been that way for over 40 years, closer to 50 years. And you can't restart them up again. You have to blow them up and start building again from the ground.
Some of them.
Well,
It depends, like, I mean,
The trains that brought the coal
yeah,
are still sitting on the tracks where they left them when they shut down.
yeah, I know.
And so is the locomotive that pulled the train, and the tracks have been sitting there unmaintained for 50 years. The whole region is like that.
Ron, what's true?
Yes, I do belong, I'm a member of the Great Northern Railroad Historical Society. And we play with the real stuff. You could redo these trains and you get them started again. No such thing that they're no good, you got trash. You could rebuild all that stuff.
Well, you can use a lot of it, some of it could
The-
be recycled. A lot of the machine tools, that people remember,
What you do is, a lot of the outdated stuff, you pull them out. And you just bring in stuff that is updated, well, like you said, higher platform.
Right.
But the thing is, you need more space now. You need more space, you need more room. That's the only difference.
Yeah.
But you can start them up.
I just was noticing the other day when I was on the subway that you now have this casino, a resorts casino opened up by the Aqueduct Racetrack in Jamaica. And now we also have the casino like 3 miles from where I am in Riverdale, the Empire City Casino at the Yonkers Raceway. And it's weird because I remember just growing up in New York when they opened up the OTB and how that was like all the young men started running to bet and the off-track betting, the horses. And that just shut down because I guess now they bet on the internet or something. I don't know exactly what's going on. But now instead, now we have Resorts International, Dope Incorporated, directly. And I don't know, for some reason, for a long time, we didn't have that stuff right in New York City. You had to go to Atlantic City or something. And now it's right here,
I just wanted to point to what Putin was saying last week about that was referenced in the first video about this question of being able to sort of reboot and get ourselves back on track. Like Alvin was saying, what can we be doing? What should we be doing? What's possible to get back on track? And he talks about how Putin says, many of our enemies are suggesting that Russia's military forces, they're rusted, they're out of it. There's nothing there, but they are wrong. We have, just in his period in office, just in his time, orienting that economy in the right direction, they've managed to really rebuild. And despite the huge difficulty of dealing with this lost generation, where they don't have anyone between the ages of 30 and 50 who can do the kinds of things that need to be done in space technology, in military technology. They don't have those people, and yet, because he really gave the mission to the country, they've gotten to the point where they are the barrier right now. Their strength is one of the things that's keeping us out of this world war. And so similarly, I think about the population and this question of how can we get this, just getting past this pessimistic thought that people are too far gone or that people are too sunk into the virtual world to come out and to act as citizens, and to remember that we can really lead the fight and change the whole population, because the potential is always there in every person. It's always there, it's latent, and the American spirit is still latent in each citizen. So when we get that spark ignited, then we'll see a huge effect from it.